aren't here yet. So, we are going to talk about statistical questions, and one of your classmates just let you know that the statistical question is one where the answers will vary. So we'll get different answers. So let's look at the first two, A and C. Actually, they're maybe not the first two, but I like to pair these two together. How many siblings do the students in this class have, and how old is this building? Which of those is a statistical question, A or C? I heard a couple votes for A. Anybody else want to vote? A or C? Which one's a statistical question? Okay, more votes for A. I agree. Because if I asked you how many siblings you have, very likely there's more than one answer in this room, right? Some of you will say 0. Some of you will say 5. Some of you will say 2. So all kinds of answers for this. So this one is the statistical question. How old is this building has just one answer. So this is not statistical. Okay? I'm going to skip to the end for a moment. Let's look at D and F. D says, where are students going to college? And F says, who won the 2024 NBA championship? Which one is a statistical question? If you think D, show one finger. If you think F, show 2 fingers. D is 1 finger. F is 2 fingers. All right, I'm seeing a lot of you think that D is a statistical question, and I agree. That one tripped some people up at first because the answer wasn't a number. But it can still be a statistical question if the answer isn't a number, okay? So we could still describe this data set of places where students are going to go to college. All right, we still have E and B left. E says, how many snow days did we have last year? Is that a statistical question? No, because there's just one answer. For the life of us, my other classes could not remember how many we had last year. Some people thought 1 and some people thought 2. What do you guys think? I can't remember either.
3.
We had 3 snow days? 3 full snow days? I mean, I can't say you're wrong because I don't remember how many we had, but I felt like it was 1 or 2.
And 1 delay.
Okay, 1 delay.
Yeah.
All right, so this is not a statistical question. We agreed on that one. How old are your parents? That one? Yes or no? Statistical? Statistical, good. All right, excellent. So, in your project, you are going to ask statistical questions of your classmates, and they're going to be questions where everybody could have a different answer, okay? Now, even though this is a statistical question, where are you going to college? The ones that we ask for our projects are going to have number answers because we're going to graph them. So I can't graph Virginia Tech versus JMU, right? I can't do that. So we're going to have number answers for the ones we do for our project. And we're going to talk more about that near the end of class today. All right, write your own example of a statistical question and a not statistical question. So some of you may have done that, but more of you haven't. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that. If you feel stuck, check with your neighbors and see what they wrote. A statistical question could be, how many pets do you have? All right. And who has a not statistical question for us? You have one, Oscar? Do you have a non-statistical question? Okay, that's fine. Anybody else thinking they have one? Let's see what my other class said. They said, what day is it today? Right? Just one answer? What day is it today? But hopefully you have your own examples on your paper, so you don't need to write down mine. All right. So that section was about statistical versus non-statistical questions, and now we're starting a new section on surveys versus experiments. So surveys and experiments are 2 different ways to collect data. A survey is something that you've probably done a lot of in the last few days because you went to all your teachers and they asked you to fill out like a form about yourself, and that's a survey when you answer questions. Often it's about you. I guess it could be about something else as well. So a survey collects information about a group of people. This is just a definition. A survey collects information about a group of people by asking them questions. And analyzing results. Okay? So what other kinds of surveys might people be taking besides the survey that a teacher gives you? Can you guys think of any other surveys? Anybody ever call to ask your opinion on things or text you to ask your opinion on things? Yeah. Yeah, I've been getting a lot of political texts lately. Like, we want to know your opinion on the election, things like that. And that's a survey too. I think I'm getting a lot of phone calls about them too, but I don't pick them up. All right, so an experiment, the definition is not as straightforward as a survey definition. So I'm going to read you the definition, we're going to write it down, and then we're just going to make sense of it, okay? An experiment deliberately imposes a treatment on individuals to measure their responses. So we're going to write that down, and then we're going to make some sense of it. Deliberately imposes a treatment on individuals to measure their responses. Good morning. Thank you. An experiment deliberately imposes a treatment on individuals to measure their responses. So what does the word treatment make you think of? Where would you get a treatment? At a hospital or a doctor, right? So often that word treatment makes you think of like a medical treatment, right? To maybe cure a disease or something. And that is one place where experiments are done with new medicines. They want to try them out and see if they're going to work or not. And so they will do an experiment where one group of people gets the new medicine, another group of people might get an older medicine, or they might get something called a placebo, which is like a fake medicine, just so that people can not know if they're taking the real medicine or not. And then they'll do an experiment to see whether the new medicine does better, right? So that is one kind of experiment. But even though the word treatment makes us think of doctors, it doesn't have to be medical. It could be as simple as if you want to know if people prefer Coke or Pepsi, and you pour them into like empty cups so that people can't see what they're drinking, you know, and they try the Coke and they try the Pepsi. That can also be an experiment, and the treatment is the Coke and the Pepsi, okay? So the treatment is just something that happens to a person. In that case, the thing that happens to them is that they're drinking Coke and Pepsi. All right, so we have two stories down here. And in these two stories, we're trying to decide if it's an example of a survey or an experiment and why, okay? So you're going to decide survey or experiment, and then you're going to give a sentence explanation. I'm going to give you a few minutes to read those two stories and decide. If you finish those two already, there's one more on the back. All right, so in this one, the educator wants to compare the effectiveness of the computer software with a textbook. And so one of the groups gets the computer software and one of the groups gets the textbook. The teacher gives them a pre-test at the beginning of the year and then another test at the end of the year. Would you guys say that that is 1, a survey, or 2, an experiment? 1, a survey, or 2, an experiment? All right, I see some people voting on that. Everybody should have thought about that by now. Okay, good. I think I see agreement that that is an experiment. Good. Does anybody want to explain why it's an experiment? Because she did ask some questions on the test, right? But what made it an experiment? What did she give the groups? Textbook or computer, right? So those are your treatments, okay? So this is an experiment. And the treatments were textbook or computer. All right. In the next story, Safeway rearranges their store, and they have a company ask their customers if they like the new arrangement of the store. Was that one? I forgot what I did. Okay. 1, a survey, or 2, an experiment? 1, a survey, or 2, an experiment? Okay, I'm seeing some answers from some of you. Very good. It is 1, a survey. They asked questions. There were not like different treatments imposed, okay? So this one is a survey. They asked people's opinions. Okay. All right, now some of you have gotten to the last one. I'm just going to read the last question real quick because not everybody got there yet. So when you're ready, turn the page. Okay. On the next page, all the way at the top, researchers want to test the effectiveness of a new blood pressure medication. They split 60 people with high blood pressure into 2 groups of 30. One group gets the new medication and the other group gets the placebo, which is a sugar pill. Each person takes their blood pressure at the same time daily, and researchers analyze the data after 4 months. Survey or experiment? Can you tell me out loud? Survey or experiment? Experiment. Very good. They had 2 different medical treatments, right? So this was an experiment. And there were 2 different medical treatments. Okay. All right, so for our projects, we are going to be doing surveys. We're going to be surveying people. We're going to be asking questions that have numerical answers. And we're going to actually ask 2 questions to see if we can find some sort of relationship between their answers to the 2 questions. All right, new section, we're going to be talking about bias. Bias is actually a statistical term, and in math, bias is similar to the way we use bias in the English language, but it's not exactly the same. People mean different things by bias, but in statistics, bias means something very, very particular. So bias happens in statistics when you use a method to collect data that favors some outcomes over others, okay? So the method of collecting data makes the survey results unfair because you have used a method that favors some results. So I'm going to write that sentence now, and you will too. Bias occurs when you use a method to collect data that favors some outcomes over others. It's actually very difficult to have a completely unbiased survey. Part of that is because of the sampling. In order to get a completely unbiased survey, you would have to actually ask everybody. That's called a census. When you ask everybody, And that's really hard to do. Like the United States government does a census every 10 years, because to do it more often is just like not sustainable. It's very hard to ask everybody. And part of the bias just comes because our methods are imperfect. All right. We have different types of bias. So undercoverage, response bias, and voluntary response bias are 3 different types of bias. Undercoverage occurs when a survey is biased when it purposely leaves people out. Okay? So if I'm doing a survey and I ask people if they are US citizens, and then the survey just cuts off after that if you say no, that survey is purposely leaving out people who are not US citizens, so it's going to be biased. So undercoverage occurs when a survey is biased when it purposefully leaves some people out. All right, so under coverage, it means we didn't cover all the people, right? All right. Response bias happens when a person is led to answer in a certain way. And that can often happen in the questioning technique. So if I wanted to do a survey and I was really hoping that the results would show that the Wendy's hamburger is the best hamburger, I might ask people, would you prefer to eat a delicious Wendy's hamburger or a disgusting McDonald's hamburger? And because I wrote it that way, because I said delicious Wendy's hamburger or disgusting McDonald's hamburger, people are going to be more likely to pick Wendy's. Now they won't all. Some people are like, no, I really like McDonald's. It's the best hamburger around, right? So I won't get perfect results that way. But I have used this type of bias, response bias here, to try to get more people to say Wendy's. Okay? So this is called response bias when a person is led to answer in a certain way. Led to answer in a certain way. Alright, and then the last one there, and this is not the only last type of bias, these are just the 3 biggest ones that we're going to talk about today. Voluntary response bias occurs when people choose themselves to answer a survey. So if you've ever been on Instagram and a friend has a poll, and the poll's like, which of these 3 puppies should I get? And you're like, oh, those puppies are so cute, and you pick one for them, right? You have chosen yourself to answer that survey. Not everybody on Instagram is going to answer that survey. They don't have to. They might be in a hurry, or maybe they don't care about puppies, right? So they're going to not answer that survey. But you, because you love those puppies, you volunteered to answer that survey, and you did it. All right? So voluntary response is often when they ask you to call in or text in or answer a survey online. Okay? So when people choose themselves to answer a survey. All right, and then we have 2 questions to try, the one about the principal and then the one about the Boy Scout. And you're going to try to explain whether you think they have undercoverage, response bias, or voluntary response bias that would create the bias in these 2 situations. I also want you to write a sentence about why you chose that one. All right, the principal of a large high school wants to know students' opinions on remote learning, and to find out, the principal takes a random sample of the students who are enrolled in online learning. Identify the type of bias present in this survey and justify your response. So let me take a quick survey. Raise your hand if you think that this is undercoverage. Raise your hand if you think this is response bias. And raise your hand if you think it's voluntary response bias. All right, so I saw definitely the most hands for undercoverage. Does somebody want to raise their hand and explain why they have that? I see 2 hands, 3 hands. Osman, what are you thinking?
The principal did not take all the students and took one student with them.
Right. He didn't take all the students' opinions, right? Which students did he leave out? He's got the online students. He left out the in-person students, right? Okay, so I agree. I think some of you had something similar. So this is undercoverage. Now, sometimes there's more than one bias, and you might have found another bias as well. I think this is the main one, though. Undercoverage because the principal did not ask the in-person students. Did not ask the in-person students. Okay. Next one, there's a Boy Scout and he gets dressed up in his scout uniform, right? And then he goes and he knocks on the doors and asks people's opinions on scouting. Do they support scouting? What are they going to say? Yeah, probably yes, because they're probably nice people and they don't want to insult the Boy Scout that's at their door, right? So what kind of bias does that create? I heard 1 vote for response. Anybody else? Agreeing? Response bias? Excellent. Very good. So by dressing up in his scouting uniform, he probably didn't even think about that. He probably didn't think. He just thought, oh, well, I'm talking about Boy Scouts, so let me just wear my scout uniform. But in doing so, he did create that response bias to make people more likely to say they support the Scouts. So I'm going to put response bias. Because wearing his uniform creates pressure. For a positive response. Okay. All right. So sometimes when we collect data, we collect data from very obvious, reputable sources like census.gov, data.gov. These .gov sites can be really good. However, other times we collect data and we really like the data set, but we're not sure if it's reliable or not. So 2 things that you want to consider if you're trying to figure out if it's reliable are who collected the data. So did the people collecting the data have like an ulterior motive? Who collected the data, which is the source? And how was the data collected? So when they collected the data, did they leave anybody out? Did they choose randomly? So how was the data collected? Flip back to the front for a moment. Let's see if you circle correctly. The statistical questions are how many pets does your family have? Because we have different answers. How many inches tall are you? We should have different answers. How many text messages do you send each day? And how many hours do you spend on social media each week? Okay? So these would all be statistical questions. This one, to find out which is the most popular song, the best way to do that would be to conduct a survey so you can ask people. And we're not imposing a treatment on students. Okay, for number 3, the online ad is created and asks users to click a link. So anytime it asks you to click a link, to call in, to text in, that is a voluntary response bias, because you are volunteering to click that link. You don't have to. Bless you. And then this teacher said an argument could be made for undercoverage depending on where the ad was placed. So if, for example, some Southlake students don't have Instagram, and when Southlake uses Instagram as the only method to advertise something, then we're leaving some students out, okay? So undercoverage can happen when you only post something in one place. So voluntary response bias was really the major one, but undercoverage could be argued as well. For number 4, to learn about dental hygiene practices, oops, not there. Oh yeah, it is. Your dentist asks whether you floss your teeth daily. Why is that response bias? AB.
Because you could prefer to say, yes, even though you don't.
Exactly. Yeah, I always tell my dentist that I floss much more often than I do. And I don't even know why. Like, I'm not really a liar in life, but I always feel bad to tell the dentist, no, I'm not really flossing, you know. Okay. And the last one here, to find the opinion of cafeteria food, a random sample was selected from students who have lockers. So that would be weird. Why are you only selecting students who have lockers? So that's definitely going to be under coverage, because we're not including the students who don't have lockers. Those students are more likely to be 11th and 12th graders, so we're leaving out a lot of 11th and 12th graders because more of the freshmen have lockers in other grades. Okay, so you don't have to write my exact words. You guys had really good words on your paper. And if you think that you want to tell me something, another bias was present in one of these that we didn't think of, feel free to let us know and we can think about your reasoning. Okay. All right, so when you're ready, switch over to the back and we're going to see if you made sense of these variables yet. The last one we said was under coverage because they didn't ask the people who didn't have lockers. All right, are you ready for me to turn it? So on the back, we're looking at these variables, quantitative variables and categorical variables. So we can do a statistical question that has quantitative variables or categorical variables, but the one that we're going to be doing for our project is quantitative. So examples of quantitative variables were number of siblings, height, amount of shoes, amount of discount. You're supposed to add more things here. So see if you can add at least 2 more to the quantitative. And then the ones that we're not going to do are categorical, but I still want you to think about what would be 2 more examples of categorical. So I'm going to take a quick walk around the room and see if you guys have done that yet. That's answer to number 1. Then you need to answer number 2 to explain the difference between quantitative and categorical variables. Say it again.
Favorite color?
Favorite color, very good. And who has another one? Mar. Favorite genre of music? Or of books? Or what are you thinking? Music? Okay. Favorite genre music. Jeffrey, did you have one?
I have favorite restaurant.
Favorite restaurant? Good one. So actually these categorical variables, we kind of used these in the Venn diagrams on the first day, right? So when we tried to find out what we had in common, we mostly didn't ask, like, do we have the same number of pets? Some of us did, though. But mostly we asked about, like, are you a cat person or a dog person, right? And then these categorical variables are what we use. But for our project, we're going to be thinking about quantitative. So explain the difference between these two. So quantitative variables, yes. One sec. Quantitative variables are what? Numbers, right? They're numbers and they can be measured. Okay? So quantitative variables, they will have number and answers. But I also want you to add, they can be measured. So interestingly, if I asked you what room number is your English class in, that is a number answer, but it's not a measurement. I'm not measuring anything with that number. It's really just like a label. So it's actually not a quantitative variable, even though it's a number. It has to be something that you can measure. All right, and then categorical variables are easy because it's in the name. Categorical variables are what? Groupings or categories, yes. Okay? All right, I'm gonna stop there. Make sure your notes are complete and your